There is a lot of confusion within the Golden State Warriors franchise at this juncture in the offseason. What has helped this team in the past might actually be hurting its present and future. The Warriors have some tough decisions to make, and what they decide to do might make or break the team's aspirations for another championship. I suppose as long as Stephen Curry remains central to the team's decision-making, there's still a fighting chance. Keyword, Stephen Curry. It would then be unthinkable that Golden State would make a decision for the success of the team without it being built around Curry as the main backing. Yet that's what seems to be happening as the Warriors venture into what may be the final years of Stephen Curry being able to lead the team to a championship. While Steph has been the Warriors' protagonist for more than a decade, success hasn't been without the invaluable presence of players such as Draymond Green and Klay Thompson. Both players played critical roles that made the Big Three as unstoppable as they were. There were only two things that could defeat this trio: injuries and time. And in time, the unimaginable happened. If you told the 2019 Warriors that they had to choose between Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, it would be a painstaking departure for the former Defensive Player of the Year. Breaking up the Splash Brothers would have been taboo. Yet here we are in 2025, and Klay Thompson has left Golden State to play for Dallas after seeing his starting role diminished with Kerr favoring Brandon Podziemski in his place, and the Warriors are trying to build a team around Steph Curry and Draymond Green. There's a clear direction within which Steve Kerr is taking Golden State, one which is the same yet different than what has won the team 4 championships. Watch the full video for the details as we break down exactly what Kerr is doing and why this might be good or bad for the future of the franchise. Steve Kerr is a very well-decorated coach. With 9 total championships, both as a player and head coach of the Golden State Warriors, his decision-making is never just random. While his most recent coaching decision regarding Kuminga caused shock across the league, this was a bet made and a bet lost by one of the league's most well-reputed coaches. In order to see what happened, we have to go back. All the way back to the beginning of the Warriors dynasty. As a first-time head coach, Steve Kerr seemed to be a savant when it came to winning championships. To lead a young team to a chip and winning Coach of the Year as a rookie head coach is no small feat. In the modern NBA, which we consider to be from 1976 onward, this has only happened 5 times. The list includes Paul Westhead, Pat Riley, Ty Lue, Steve Kerr, and Nick Nurse as rookie head coaches who have won NBA titles. The accolades and respect that he gained showed just how much of an impact Kerr can have in a locker room. So how did he do it? Starting with Steph Curry, the man was an absolute anomaly. At first sight, he looks like an undersized 2-guard. Steph Curry seemed to be a small guard whose game predicated around taking long-range outside shots. He wasn't seen as very physical and didn't play like a traditional point guard. While he had good ball handling skills, he appeared to be more of a shooter than a facilitator. Even the shoe companies had their doubts, as Nike didn't seem to be too keen on a player many considered a top prospect. What team would waste a lottery pick on a player who seems to be the antithesis of successful teams of the past? Next up, we have Klay Thompson. Like Stephen Curry, he's the son of a former NBA player who's shown he can shoot it with the best of them, but not exactly a player to create for himself off the dribble. He's got great size, but who wants a 2-guard that can't create his own shots? Worse yet, can't create for anyone else. MJ would laugh this kid out of the interview. And finally, Draymond Green. He's too small to be a center, can't create off the dribble, nor shoot well enough to be a forward, and too slow to be a guard. What you have is essentially a band of tweeners who lack predetermined skill sets to fit into a typical NBA offense. They will either need to move mountains to get this team to work, or they could find that one head coach that could get these guys to coexist while adding the perfect complementary pieces. Somehow, they managed to do the latter. As a matter of fact, the 3 fit so well together that they had the ability to win almost without regard for the 4th and 5th pieces. With their first chip, they went with Barnes and Iguodala. Their next chip was Durant and Pachulia. For the 3rd chip, Pachulia was swapped for McGee, and chip number 4 was Andrew Wiggins and Kevon Looney. With Steve Kerr's motion offense, instead of a single player playing off his 4 teammates, we had the revolutionary planetary gear set. While these players lacked certain key attributes, when played together, their movements on the court were almost flawless, covering up each other's weaknesses, forcing teams to have to contend with a 3-headed monster, the likes of which the league has never seen before. The closest being the 1996 Chicago Bulls with Jordan, Pippen, and Steve Kerr. Whoops, my bad. That was Dennis Rodman. Eventually, injuries happened. Klay went down and the Warriors went to the lottery. But while Klay was out, someone else had stepped up. Jordan Poole, who had many stints in the G League, had become much improved. In Klay's absence, Poole's ability to play in the backcourt next to Curry and as the main ball handler with Steph off the floor gave the Warriors a different look than what they had before with Klay. The fact that JP3 could light it up from deep made this Warriors team without Klay look like a team that was ready to win it all again, despite it being 3 years since their last finals appearance, one which happened before they got Poole. But there was one issue with Poole. Outside of the ability to guard, he was in Klay's spot. With Klay's return from injury, Poole was snatched out of the Warriors starting lineup. The Warriors' regular season record struggled once this happened, as Klay, who'd missed the last 2 years, seemed intent on proving that he still is who almost everyone believed he was back in the day. Unfortunately, he wasn't nearly the same. While he'd have a few good games, Klay was taking forced shots, and even though it might not have seemed that way at the time, he was playing outside of the flow of the offense, trying to attack off the dribble, taking heavily contested shots, and despite this, due to his legacy as a Warrior and his legendary status as a three-point shooter, he stayed in the lineup ahead of Jordan Poole, who was at this point clearly a better option as a starter than Klay Thompson was. Even though the Warriors ended up winning the chip, Klay Thompson was noticeably struggling to fit with the current identity of the Warriors. Klay had a rough time, forcing up as many shots as he could, averaging 18 field goal attempts per game coming back off injury, which is the same number he took in his prime years. While this was bad enough, he did it while averaging 5 less minutes per game. As much as Klay struggled offensively with an evident decline in his shooting percentages on open looks and very questionable shot selection, which made matters worse, it was his struggles at the other end of the court that finally did him in. Unable to keep up with the guards like he used to, Steve Kerr even suggested that Klay guard fours instead. While many thought this was just a small ball lineup adjustment and went after Steve Kerr for it, it was the only way to keep Klay Thompson on the floor. The Warriors had no elite perimeter defender that was also good enough to be in the starting lineup. The punch during the summer of 2022 made things that much more difficult. With Klay's struggles during his return, everyone wondered if he could return to some semblance of what he was pre-injury. If he couldn't, it was going to be inevitable that he'd be replaced by Jordan Poole in the starting lineup. Steve Kerr was hopeful as Klay retained that starting role into the 2022-23 season. Unfortunately, the franchise underestimated just how much of an impact that altercation between Green and Poole had on the locker room. Now, it didn't have quite the same impact on the Big Three as it had with the rest of the team. As a matter of fact, Green's punch served Klay some relief to the upward pressure that was Jordan Poole. Klay knew that if he couldn't get it done, Poole would have been ready to essentially break up the Splash Brotherhood, a bad omen for the Big Three. Regardless of the narrative that came out of the locker room post-punch, it was clear. Draymond, the group's enforcer, felt threatened. He felt Jordan was an outsider who needed to be put in his place. The organization was tied to the Big Three as a group, however, after 4 championships, and despite Poole playing a sizable role in the last one, Dre was letting him know that he was never going to be one of them. And here's why. After that show against Boston, Poole thought he was that dude. And he was. JP was better at moving the ball than Klay, gave the Warriors that secondary distributor/ball handler, which led to better performances by Stephen Curry, and despite having more turnovers, he played with better pace while giving you more dynamic scoring with no clear advantage at the other end of the floor for Klay, who, like I said, wasn't able to guard the perimeter. Poole's trajectory was clear. The disappointing showing in the 2023 playoffs made the decision to let Poole go a much easier one for Golden State. They obviously couldn't keep both him and Draymond, so sending Poole his way kept both Green and Thompson in place. The franchise knew they'd be trading him at this point, hence the reason for drafting Pods. I'm actually 99.999% certain that Pods was selected by Steve Kerr. The Warriors needed Poole's replacement, and they were able to get their guy with the 19th pick. While he won't break down a defense, his shooting, hustle, and the fact that he's a willing passer made it very easy for him to flourish on the team. Kerr's affinity for Pods only became more evident when Klay had to be benched, and the next man up was the rookie. Pods would be the perfect cog in the wheel of the motion offense. Steve Kerr is not incorrect when it comes to playing winning basketball. However, winning basketball doesn't always win basketball, if that makes sense. Pods wasn't a better scorer nor shooter than Klay, wasn't a part of the Big Three, and was content with playing a supportive role. This was a big part of the reason I consider Pods' selection in the draft to be on Steve Kerr. Podziemski's job was to come off the bench and give these guys hustle, three-point shooting, and ball movement. The problem came around when the Warriors got to the second half of the 2022-23 season, and Klay was still hunting shots and not being the guy in key moments when Steph Curry was off the floor. Now, while Klay was averaging decent points, he was taking a high volume of shots while not exactly exactly shooting it well, averaging less than 40% from the field. A player averaging such low efficiency and taking as many shots is replicative of a decent player on a lottery team. You only see this when you have a somewhat decent player who's surrounded by other terribly inefficient players, so he just shoots it without regard for shot selection. Put simply, Klay Thompson was not making his teammates better on the floor. This made it difficult for Steve Kerr to keep playing Klay Thompson. Cue Jonathan Kuminga. This description that I just gave you isn't that far off from the Warriors' young player. Now hear me out. Jonathan Kuminga is one of the most gifted scorers in the league. Sure, he's not a knockdown three-point shooter, and his mid-range game isn't quite Kawhi's or Kevin Durant's, but his ability to get to or play above the rim, draw contact and get to the line, his array of counter moves, strength and speed make him really tough to defend. When he guards the point of attack on the other end, he also becomes one of the toughest defenders to beat one-on-one. Not to mention his versatility in guarding 1 through 4. You could argue that if his three-point shot becomes more consistent and his court vision improves, he'd easily be one of the best players in the league. His 40% shooting from 3 in the playoffs shows just that. You could also argue that with enough playing time and reps, both of these things could come to fruition. That is the upside of Jonathan Kuminga. His playstyle, while not inherently selfish, however, can seem as such if you've only seen him play at the highest level. It's quite evident that his first few years of basketball involved a lot of 1v1 matchups as he learned the game. By the time he migrated to the US, he was so much better than his peers, they just gave him the ball and got out of his way at the high school level. Here's what this means. Without going through the rigorous AAU system, he didn't get to play with and against high-level competition at a young age to develop certain abilities you see in some of the premier guards in the league. This includes court vision, passing, team defense, reading the game at a high level to predict and nullify his opponent's moves. Without having those skills at an elite level, he's been relegated to playing the 4 in Steve Kerr's offense and the 3 when the lineups allow it. We've seen other players who came into the league in the same way. One of them was Giannis Antetokounmpo, and the other was Pascal Siakam. Whenever you get these types of players, especially African-based players who move to the US based on sheer talent alone without a ton of exposure to high-level playing in the States at a young age, a period of learning is to be expected. You can't expect a player that isn't used to a system to come in year 1 and dominate players who've been in it for 10 to 15 years. Regarding Giannis and Siakam, both players at a young age were still trying to figure out the game. While they came into the league as raw prospects, both were playing north of 30 minutes per game by their 3rd year. Jonathan Kuminga in his 3rd year averaged 26 minutes a game and followed that up with even less minutes in year 4 with just 25 per game. What's so different between these players that has kept Jonathan Kuminga from being given 30+ minutes a night, and even worse, being taken completely out of the Warriors' player rotation down the stretch and in crucial games? While you could advocate for the team's lack of championship aspirations in the case of Giannis as a reason why he was given the time to develop, we can't say the same for Siakam. The Raptors were competing for a championship while Spicy P was being developed and were still able to win, even getting the first seed in Siakam's sophomore season with a 59-23 record. Keep in mind that at this point, Siakam had only been playing basketball for 7 years, first picking up the sport in 2011. So just on that one situation alone, the team trying to win a championship excuse is kind of irrelevant. Being a raw prospect won't keep a player from finding success at the next level. So if not the team situation, and it's not him being a raw prospect, what else is there? Is it possible that the Warriors system is the problem for Jonathan Kuminga? Steve Kerr's motion offense based on players' ability to read and react requires a lot of ball movement and off-ball movement as well as player engagement. The goal is to scramble the defense to get the best look possible. It's rather simple in theory, however a bit more difficult to execute, especially when one's afraid of making the wrong read. Steve has been notorious for pulling Jonathan Kuminga for every such mishap. This brand of basketball is a very high risk / high reward with open looks on one end, but the potential for turnovers on the other. Not every player thrives in that setting, as we've seen players such as Chris Boucher, who didn't really develop until he went and played for the Raptors after leaving Golden State, going so far as to win a championship. Ty Jerome is another player who played well enough before his 1 year with the Warriors, went to the Cavs and almost doubled his output, contributing to his team having the best record in the Eastern Conference. Even Jordan Poole is coming off his career high in points, assists, three-point shooting percentage, and steals, despite playing less minutes per game than the previous 3 years, 2 of which were with the Golden State Warriors. The Wizards' 18 wins over the season isn't an indictment of Poole and rather one of the team. That is to say, the Warriors system isn't perfect and doesn't bring out the best in every player, but if Jonathan Kuminga is going to find success with the Warriors, there's something he will have to do differently. Before I point out the exact issue, recall that I mentioned earlier that Klay Thompson was feeling that upward pressure from Jordan Poole. To be frank, Poole should have remained in the starting lineup over Klay beginning the year the Warriors won the championship. Not only did the Warriors' record speak for itself, but the film and individual statistics back this up. Poole was a +4 on the season to Klay's +2. Steve Kerr knew the change needed to be made and expressed that it would cause issues in the locker room, so it never happened. It wasn't until the following year when Klay addressed it in an interview, asking if he or Wiggins should be benched. The Warriors had drafted Pods, and immediately they were in the same situation as the prior year with Klay and Poole. When the team's record had suffered enough, Kerr replaced Klay Thompson in the starting lineup with Pods. Why were both of these players better in the starting lineup than Klay Thompson? For the same reason that Draymond Green remains in the starting lineup ahead of Jonathan Kuminga. Jonathan Kuminga sees himself as an unstoppable force on offense, and rightfully so, because he is. Not many players in the league can stop JK from getting to the basket. While Steve Kerr sees and acknowledges this, he struggled to find minutes for Kuminga. When Jimmy Butler joined the team, forget it. JK's minutes were gone. Did Steve Kerr take JK out of the lineup simply because Jimmy arrived? Yes and no. Jonathan Kuminga brought something to the table that Jimmy doesn't have, but Jimmy also brought something the younger JK didn't. What Jimmy had allowed Steve Kerr's motion offense to flow, but it wasn't exactly the read and react. What Jimmy brought was something Steve Kerr saw in the Olympics. During the Olympics, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Stephen Curry led Team USA to a gold medal. What Kevin Durant and LeBron James, premier superstars in the league, brought to Team USA was exactly what Jimmy brought. The ability to see the value of moving the ball to the next man, or even better, moving it to get Steph Curry an open look. While driving the lane, Jimmy doesn't even look at the basket sometimes if there's another player. His job is to collapse the defense, and the more defenders he draws, the better. This means he now has an open man to take an uncontested shot. Unfortunately, when Klay returned from injury, he was so focused on proving himself to get that extension in that respect, he stopped playing the type of basketball that allowed the Warriors to win. Both Poole and Pods were better distributors, but Klay's tenure gave him enough rope to find his way back. That never happened. Jonathan Kuminga, unfortunately, doesn't have storied tenure or a record as an elite three-point shooter, and regardless of how you look at it, playing for the Warriors and alongside Stephen Curry means he'll have to think of himself as more of a playmaker or facilitator and rebounder before anything else. This past season was his best as a playmaker with 3.3 assists per 36 minutes. If he can get that to 5 or better and improve his rebounds to 8 or more per 36 minutes from the current 6.6, it will be impossible for Steve Kerr to keep him off the floor regardless of his scoring numbers. Jonathan Kuminga is elite at getting to the basket, but winning in the NBA requires all 5 players on the floor to work together to get it done. While he might have a 56% chance of finishing that contested 2, every Warriors player not named Draymond or Jimmy will hit that open 3 over 40% of the time. The only exception is Steph Curry, but it's Steph Curry. This was the Warriors' calling card all season long and for pretty much the entirety of Steve Kerr's career as head coach. This was the reason Boucher, who was still talented, was eventually traded. Kerr wants players who move the ball. When Jimmy arrived and started collapsing the defense and finding players open, they were hitting those open looks. The kick out is always the right play when you draw multiple defenders. With Jimmy playing the exact way that Steve Kerr wants JK to play, always finding Steph, always finding his teammates open on the floor, it became impossible for Steve Kerr to keep Jimmy on the bench. The secondary players were now engaged instead of ball watching, and guys were more in rhythm. This is the biggest misfit between Jonathan Kuminga's game and what Steve Kerr needs to see from him to put him on the floor. Jimmy did what Steve wanted, and Jonathan Kuminga either refused to or found it too difficult. Even if he's not fully committed to a motion offense, his skill set and scoring threat should allow him to consistently draw the defense. Instead of playing the score, however, JK will have to turn his game upside down, break down the opposing team's defenses, and then find the open man. Forget scoring, forget looking for the basket. That does not impress Steve Kerr. So what if you think you could get to the basket and finish over your opponent? So what if you end up getting a turnover? As the most reliable scorer outside of Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler, the most important asset you can be to your team is to set your teammates up for success. This is what's needed to win at the highest level with Stephen Curry. The moment JK goes onto the floor and prioritizes himself before setting up his teammates with open looks, he's going to be seen as a selfish player, whether right or wrong, and he will not see any growth as a player within this system. Every single player I've mentioned up to this point outside of Klay Thompson and Chris Boucher, including Siakam, Giannis, Pods, and Poole, all average 5 assists or better per 36 minutes. That is the metric of success in Golden State. Was Steve Kerr right in giving JK DNPs because he's not a great playmaker? That's certainly a debatable topic. If you have a high usage player putting his head down, you might end up with a team of ball watchers. Despite getting DNP'd and called up in the 12th hour, it seemed JK handled it well. His offseason has already kicked off and he's back in the gym, but in order to take his game to the next level, his focus needs to shift to how he can make his teammates better, and in order to get the time on the floor to do that, it has to be his primary focus going forward until he gets there. But let me know your thoughts. Do you agree with my assessment of JK and Steve Kerr? Do you think that addressing this issue would give the team an entirely new look for next season? Post your thoughts in the comments below. Just don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on all your notifications so you don't miss any of my latest uploads. Thanks for watching. Till next time, swoosh.